Mm, okay. So just to then introduce Denise and Vass. So Denise Hearn is an author, an applied researcher, and an advisor focused on how economic power and paradigms shape our world. She's a resident senior fellow at the Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment at Columbia University. Denise co-authored a book called The Myth, Capitalism, Monopolies, and Death of Competition, which was a fantastic book, and it was named Financial Times Best Book of 2018. And I really enjoyed reading that book as well. Vass Bednar is the executive director of McMaster University's Master of Public Policy and Digital Society program. Her work focuses on the intersection between policy and the innovation ecosystem. She is also a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation in Waterloo and writes a popular newsletter called Regs to Riches. Vass is also a regular commentator in the media, and so you may have seen her before on the in the news or read her material in the newspapers. So what we're going to do for the keynote is I'll hand over to Denise and Vass, and they will talk for up to 30 minutes, I think, and then we'll have lots of time for discussion, Q&A afterwards. So I will hand over to Vass and Denise now.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us. Do you mind making me a co-host so that I can share screen? Because you got two pracademics, people with university affiliations who are doing research. Of course, we made slides. You know that meme, like, we're researchers. Of course, we brought slides. Thank you. I think it's just about to work. I'll unpin you, Keen. I did that. Sorry. If you were wondering why it made you bigger. Here we go. I got the big green one. Thank you for having us. Denise and I are going to actually change it up. We're not cutting this in half. We're going to, pass the baton back and forth, and hopefully that brings some energy to your afternoon. And we're presenting a couple of thoughts that are a little bit newer, just kind of want to put this in a bigger context. And just before I start, we want to say a thank you to the McGill Max Bell School for this prize that supported our project and has supported our thinking, and also Keen for your kind words. Some of what's happening with competition cases, competition law, competition thinking, really, I mean, this is a little bit more so in other jurisdictions than Canada, but really is emblematic of the transversal approach that we often talk about wanting to see when it comes to regulating the digital economy, the integrations that some of these newer challenges demand. And I wanted to bring up video games, not because I'm a huge gamer. I haven't really gamed since like the N64 days, but because this case with the FTC, with this multiplayer game Fortnite, started to bring together consumer protection, privacy, competition, deceptive patterns, data, addictive design, kind of all in one place, but through the lens and lever of competition. And that's really promising. What happened a couple of years back, they were fined more than $500 million for privacy violations and unwanted charges. So, we can chat later, or, feel free to share in the chat. Maybe we have people on the line who do play, or have people in their family who play, who feel that they were drawn in to, they're called, I was reading about it, like not loot bags, that's a birthday party, but kind of the loot and some of those elements. And they will be paying a significant penalty for tricking people into making unintentional purchases. And when we zoom out and I think, look at our experiences with e-commerce writ large, there's all sorts of tricks that are nudging us towards making purchases that we may not have otherwise wanted to. Also kind of ripping from the headlines and just kind of setting the stage a little bit, and apologies if you spoke about this sooner. But, Keen I'm most familiar with his work of everyone who's on the line. Actually, probably most familiar with like Denise, Keen, and then my work. I would rank myself third in terms of my own familiarity. I'm joking, but Keen's work on measuring the value of data and bringing to light these data chains and data ecosystems and data markets. We just saw the FTC banning a location data company that powers this surveillance ecosystem. Again, a particular innovation in the realm of competition law and also privacy, right? And starting to go after that surveillance element. None of this is about the big fix writ large. All these elements are how, an approach that we're going to tell you about, that we're hopeful and optimistic about, sort of helps. And then a US agency proposing a new rule that would block data brokers. This is through the Financial Consumer Protection Bureau, something like this. It is in my speaker note and in the note, and we'll share the slides. Blocking data brokers from selling personal data, and that goes hand in hand with this kind of recent executive order, doing more to kind of intervene around personal data and access and who has it, when, and why. And we put this forward as examples of both a more integrated approach, but also examples of using other kind of complementary policy tools that are fundamentally about being in that competition space. Now, in a case that will come to characterize our time, Canada's hot on the heels of this, but a US judge ruled a couple of months ago that Google illegally obtained their monopoly. And I think just a few weeks ago, we saw some potential remedies, right? The potential breakup of Google proposed and discussed. And then, of course, that's being chased, not chased, but I would say a more appropriate word is probably echoed, right? Echoed by Canada, announcing, inconveniently for Denise on the Thanksgiving Thursday in the US, that Canada would be suing Google for its anti-competitive conduct in online advertising. And Google was investigated by the Competition Bureau in 2018. At that time, the Competition Bureau did not have the tools that it needed to properly conduct a thorough investigation, so they weren't able to move forward. And I think that's a fascinating aspect too. That's just some scene setting. But when we think about Google, I'm going to pass the baton to Denise. But Denise, I'm here for you, and I will advance the slides if that's okay, unless you want me to switch and then you pull up the presentation as you present. But I'm here
No,
for you. I'm happy to be the clicker.
perfect.
Okay.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Vass. So I think, yeah, thank you. That was a great backgrounder in terms of like some of the really current stuff that's been happening. And, when we wrote the Big Fix, one of the themes that we explored was this idea that companies have moved from really trying to dominate one core industry to collecting assets across industries, and that they've become sort of everything companies. And that in a way that this complementary approach that Vass is pointing to, this sort of no one policy jurisdiction having the sort of commensurate tools in and of themselves to get at these huge everything companies, these ecosystems of asset companies, I think is part of pointing to what we're sort of like giving you the lead at the beginning, which is, our Big Fix is a whole of government approach. So when we look at Alphabet's ecosystem, it is also kind of a quintessential everything company. Here is all of the various sort of markets or sectors in which it is operational. So of course, ads, search, cloud, AI, and machine learning. They've got their own VC and investment capital firm, corporate venture capital, hardware and consumer electronics, health and life sciences, transport and navigation, on and on. And I think we point to this because traditionally in antitrust law, of course, one of the core things when you're building a case is trying to define the relevant market of any product or service. And there is now sort of an ongoing debate about how to do that with companies that have such sprawling universes of products and services, and where they can leverage their free cash flow from, profitable lines of business to sort of continue to expand their ecosystem into an ever widening array of products. And my favorite example of this is when I went to London to revisit where I used to live. I went to this old market that I used to get lunch around the corner from where I would work, and there was an Amazon hair salon. And I was sort of like, why is Amazon trying to cut my hair? And it was because they were trying to reverse engineer a consumer's day and figure out anywhere that we spent money was a place that that they could potentially service, and they were undercutting independent salons by 10 or 15 pounds on those services. And that's just yet another small example of companies being able to leverage the sort of profound cash troves that they have from their in some cases, sort of monopolized lines of business into these other areas. So when we looked at Canadian companies, of course, they're nowhere near the scale and size of Amazon and Alphabet and some of the Magnificent Seven in the US, but they still emulate this structure. So when we looked at TELUS, part of it was also helping. We tried to write the book in a way that's very accessible for an average reader and for the average Canadian consumer who thinks of TELUS primarily as their phone company, but may not realize that actually TELUS is operational in, again, a variety of verticals, including agricultural services. They have their own strategic investment arm, and actually increasingly a lot of international business where they do sort of B2B services. And then also in health. And I learned researching for the book that TELUS is Canada's #2 pharmacy benefit manager, which sits between the insurance providers, the pharmacy, and negotiates drug prices. And the United Healthcare is also a huge PBM in the US, as well as a sort of agglomerated health platform that has all these different verticals, which of course has been in the news a huge amount this past week. Loblaws, similarly, we did a little deep dive on sort of private labels and how much of the shelves now are really constructed with private label brands. So I think everybody knows No Name and Joe Fresh, but there's so many others that sort of go underappreciated. And also just the consolidation within groceries. So you can see there all of the different logos of various sort of grocery retail outlets, all of course owned by Loblaw. And our favorite is the independent brand, which are actually franchised businesses, which are not independent, but sort of capitalizing on the cachet perhaps of shopping locally. And then, and also health and other services. So, how do you deal with everything companies? And I think, wait, is this when I turn it back to you, Vass? I forget what I said. Sorry.
Don't be sorry. I think you still get this one. I think you still get this one. This is from the book, one of the elements of a big fix, and then I run us through some AI stuff and pass it back to you for kind of whole of government.
The closer. Awesome.
What does it look like? Bring us home. What do we learn from the US?
Okay, great. I like it. Okay, so when we're thinking about how the regulatory and sort of legislative tools that we have to deal with these types of everything companies, I guess our biggest contention is that you have to impose structural remedies because of the scale and size and scope of these businesses today. And so some of that is, of course, breakups, so breaking up larger companies or structurally separating them into their component parts. There's also in the US, there's some historical precedent of other remedies, including, of course, there's divestiture, but we think that that's not as interesting of a remedy. But another one was actually quarantining. So in certain cases in the past, the FTC or even the Supreme Court would say to a business, once they had been found in violation of antitrust law, that they were not allowed to enter new business segments. And so they sort of quarantined their ability to kind of expand the scope of their business lines. And so that could be something to sort of resuscitate. And then and also in other cases, there was mandatory licensing of IP. And we think that that could be another potential remedy. I think in terms of structural separations or breakups, the point I also like to make too is that we think of breakups as like unscrambling the omelet, so difficult to do, impossible, a nuclear option. But actually companies regularly break themselves up. And actually about 30% of all M&A activity is spinoffs, and divestitures of various kinds. And so companies are very adept at finding ways to generate value from breaking things apart. And certainly if they've been found in violation of the law, the regulators, should clearly have the ability to do the same. So I think I'll pass it back to you, Vass.
And we just wanted to shout out the Balanced Economy Project's somewhat recent paper on breaking up the giants of harm, where they kind of explore these themes more deeply. There's another element related to competition. We tend to enter the competition conversation by talking about price, right? And when we talk about price, we make this point in the book, we're fundamentally talking about power. But pricing has been supercharged and sort of reformed by algorithmic systems. Now, the Bank of Canada gestures at this when they talk about corporate pricing behaviors. But Economics 101 tells us that as the cost of inputs come down, the cost of something on a shelf comes down too. But that's just not what's happening out there, right? It's not what we see. So during the pandemic, lots of chatter, memes around, greedflation, how much are firms passing on. But there's a very messy nomenclature to discuss what is fundamentally personalized pricing. So this kind of constant micro calibration for the individual. And this calibration can occur independent of a firm size, right? As long as a firm has an ecosystem, however big, however small, whether it's Ticketmaster, an airline, or the Taco Bell app, they're engaging in these behaviors. And we wanted to put forward the nomenclature so that you could keep your ears and eyes out for it in your scholarship and in your research and what you're consuming, but also to be kind of mindful of it going forward. Now, in a university context, you could argue this is very healthy, right? All sorts of people are paying different prices that are calibrated to their family's ability to pay, their merit-based scholarships, etc. But this is about the ad tech that's used to sell ads, almost being co-opted, like to sell prices, right? And calibrate prices. And it could be viewed under false and misleading advertising standards. Canadian context starting to touch on this. There is a case related to the Calibrate software with gas prices. It's being presumed that the Competition Bureau is investigating Real Pages software, which is called, I will remember it, YieldStar. Uber's just introduced their upfront pricing, which is still very opaque, right? And in the airline market study that's currently underway, we may see some chatter about how do loyalty programs factor into airline pricing? How does the data that airlines have on us factor into their competitive advantages, et cetera? So personalized pricing, there's and apologies, I get excited about the topic, so I'll go through it more quickly, but there's a great issue of the American Prospect, sorry it's not Canadian, but from this June, free and open to read, all about what they frame as the age of recoupment, sort of saying that companies, it's through this suite of pricing strategies that they're now squeezing the maximum amount they can from us. And I wanted to pair this with a great piece from Ira Wells from earlier this fall, where he sort of just observed that we're entering into a new era of consumer anger. And Denise and I always have to end up talking about emotions in some way when we talk about competition, because like the issues are so frustrating and sort of maddening and they make you crazy. but it also contributes to this loss of trust, right? Loss between, erosion of trust between corporation and consumer for sure, but also between citizen and state, right? When these practices are normalized and kind of constantly occurring. So just some other readings. Again, it's in the ether, it's out there, and it's no longer just something that economists are debating the efficiency or kind of merit of, right? And reporting from the breach is where in Canada we're sort of seeing the most kind of initial coverage of this. And Denise and I always want to shout out journalism that covers competition issues, because we've seen so many recent kind of fast followers from legislators picking up on really important storytelling in the news. Another thing we just wanted to put in the window, I'm making out like a bandit because I get $1 every time someone talks to us about supply management. But we don't mean to make light of it in terms of, I know it's a technology focused presentation, but we bring up supply management because if you think of algorithms as privately set regulators, supply management is sort of a public algorithm, right? That's democratically determined, democratically disclosed, and it's in the crosshairs. It's been contested through USCMA or CUSMA. You see it in social media, you see it in editorials from the Globe and Mail. Should we dismantle this? We even have, people we're friendly with at the Competition Bureau who have sort of said to us, yeah, we legislated a cartel. When we have this conversation going forward in Canada about whether and what kind of system we need, and if supply management is still sort of serving us, we also need to contextualize it in that global context and kind of who the erosion of this system would benefit and who it would hurt, and recognize that the absence of publicly set rules for a system like this doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be this idealized kind of perfect free market. So that's a comparison that we like to make and that we make in the book, that algorithms are privately set regulators, right? They're not an unregulated context. And as you appreciate, they're throttling and manipulating the prices that we see, the information that we access, and the goods that we see in search. I wanted to very quickly tell you about one musical aside before I pass it back to Denise. I'm not sure if Keen knew I was going to do like a Britney Spears kind of ABBA thing midway through the presentation. But when we talk about the problem of the problems, plural, of course, of corporate consolidation in Canada, we often see these kind of very flippant, knee-jerk solutions, which is we just need more competition, right? What could be more obvious than that? But easier said than done. And as we were researching, Denise was researching pharmacy benefit managers. I was researching this mysterious person who's racked up over 15 billion streams, more than artists like Mariah Carey, Michael Jackson, etc. Okay? This mystery artist is everywhere and nowhere, except he's right here on the slide. He's a Swedish composer. His name's Johan Rohr, and he's used over 50 different pseudonyms to create songs for hundreds and hundreds of fake musicians. So Johan represents an instance where he's creating more, right? More synthetic audio. There's more music that's out there, but is more even ever better. And he's using, as we just said, fake music accounts, right? To disguise his strategy. There is a human at some point in these systems, there's always a human somewhere. But he's changing the marketplace of music, right? And manipulating it in his favor. Is that what we want? Do we want arguably these systems to be sort of polluted with more? There's more I can tell you about this Korean pop girl band, but why don't I speed us along so that we have enough time for questions? Keep going, Vass. I don't want to play the song. My bad. I'm really sorry. More competition isn't always necessarily better. And Denise makes this point more effectively than I do. But, competition in and of itself isn't really anything. It doesn't mean much. It's more a means to an end. So we have to be thinking about competition for what and what kind. And we wanted to put forward again in that text context with generative AI and cultural industries, especially in a Canadian context where we've really stood up for protecting and elevating culture through the Online Streaming Act and through other historic elements of our public policy ecosystem. From a policy perspective, we probably should be a little bit savvier and a little bit smarter in terms of recognizing how these markets are already being remade by the infusion of this. I'll call it junk, but that's not the official term, right? Deceives the consumer. Anyone here listens to jazz for reading or classical while they're working or crashing through email? It's very likely that you've listened to audio generated by a computer system. How do you feel about that? Does it matter? Should it matter? It's displacing earnings for, I'll say, real, authentic human musicians. And there's a real risk for workers' rights because instead of, the platforms negotiating with humans, why not eliminate humans altogether, train systems on their information, and just make fake music? And if you really want to get freaked out, the AI influencers are here. But why don't I pass it to a real policy influencer? I'll pass it back to Denise for the triple entendre of the big fix and some of our whole of government approach.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I was at a conference this week that was focused on the future of work and sort of workplace issues. And it was interesting because one of the discussions was about how there's so much talk about AI replacing certain jobs, but one of the core questions was actually what happens when AI is your boss. And you think about a Uber or Lyft driver, and actually, the majority of who and what is sort of dictating work terms to them is really an algorithm. And what kind of recourse do they have when they can't actually exhibit complaints, directly to the algorithm, and there's like no sort of intermediating layer for them. So just one little tack onto that. Okay, so the big fix is a triple entendre. The title, we're pretty proud of it, so we like to let everybody know. So the first is that increasingly people feel that markets are rigged or fixed in some way, and it ranges from feeling mild annoyance to all the way to sort of like revolutionary and violent, which again, I do think that the United Healthcare CEO assassination is a really kind of poignant example of really how frustrated a lot of people are about these issues. And so that's the first meaning. The second is that a lot of the fixes that we kind of put forward, and Vass alluded to two of them here. So we often hear like end supply management, and that's going to, as she says, unleash the power of poultry onto the market and, benefit Canadian consumers. Or, let's just bring one foreign competitor or add more competition. That we don't think that these are necessarily the fixes that they're sort of cracked up to be. And then thirdly, our big fix, and I will move us through here because I know we've got 2 minutes left to half an hour, is essentially this notion that we hinted at the beginning, a whole of government approach. And we want to say it's not about sort of adding additional regulatory burden or bureaucratic process. It's really thinking, strategically and smartly about how to break open markets, make them more free, more fair, more accessible. And that ultimately you do need a referee to kind of set the rules of engagement in markets. And if, one of our core contentions is that markets have rules, all markets have rules, and they can be determined democratically or they can be determined by private interests. And our preference is democratically through our regulatory and legislative, and legal systems. And so it's not about sort of necessarily fixing markets or picking winners, but it's about co-creating and shaping them in the public interest. And one of the elements that we talk about too is with this whole of government is that the scale and scope of these challenges, whether it's consumer protection or effective competition policy, effective trade policy, effective IP considerations, labor law, this really kind of intersects and suffuses so many areas that you can't just leave it up to one bureau that's nested under the Ministry of, industry essentially. And one, because there's a core sort of conflict of interest, but two, the fact that mergers and acquisitions have increased at such a pace, and that the economy has also grown significantly. Meanwhile, the budget of the Bureau has sort of flatlined or, mostly remained fairly consistent over time. They've gotten a little bit of a bump recently, but it's not commensurate to the scale of the problem. And so what we want to put forward is that every ministry should be thinking about these issues and using their core competencies to reflect on how concentrated markets are impacting the ability of, whether it's health or, again, trade or labor, how these issues intersect, and also that the provinces, with their consumer protection mandates and their regulation of commerce, have a role to play here. And then we also point to other, it's not just the government, but it's also engaging citizens and having a more democratic approach to this policy area. So how can we make it less technocratic? How can we bring in the voices of people who are most directly affected by these policies and by these market conditions? And, a couple of our ideas are a citizens assembly for competition, which we think would be really interesting. Having the Bureau increasingly do listening sessions. They do that. They have folks that go across the country and engage with communities and try to hear what's going on for people, but we'd love to see even more of that. And, and finally, more dedicated reporting on corporate power, because we just don't have that many folks who have the kind of competition beat or the market power beat. And we think that could make a huge difference in the storytelling and the kind of investigation, the investigative journalism that really can, as Vass said, lead to kind of fast following from the Bureau or from others.
I'll take
What
you I'll
else?
take you to the
Yeah.
next slide. I'm not going to play this video. Obviously, we've embedded a video. It's just this little girl who totally she gets it. You know what I mean? She knows that we need a big fix, and she's yelling to her parents about two ice creams calling 9 quid. Being priced at 9
Costing.
quid. So, yeah, costing. So I
Oh,
have to,
somebody
as I
says,
click
let's watch
forward.
it.
You want to watch it? Okay, let's see
Yeah,
if
they
the
want to
audio
watch it.
works.
We can find it on YouTube and link to put it in the chat.
Yeah, I can't hear it. I can't hear it. But Vass could
Oh,
reenact
sorry.
it.
I was loving it. Sorry, I could hear it really well. Sorry. We'll give this link to Keen because we have a few things embedded. Yeah, Denise, we really just have like a couple of other smaller ideas and then just the kind of benchmarking around trust and the US and Canada. So wherever you want to go here to land the plane, and then we'll just get to chat with these people, whatever you'd like to do. This is a great crew.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just end with the fact that Vass and I do feel optimistic that there's been lots of great progress in Canada already, and we're so enthused about, the fact that we made really substantial changes to our competition law over the last year and a half, and they were passed unanimously through Parliament. So there's lots of cross-partisan support in a world divided, which feels like, some crazy wormhole we've all dropped into. Yeah, and just that we think now is an opportunity for Canada to kind of build on that momentum, take it further. There's a lot of public support for these issues. So yeah, I think I'll just leave it there. And thanks so much, Kian, for having us, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, both of you. That's great. So I'm got lots of questions. It's generated a lot of thoughts in my own head, but I'm sure there are other people who have also got their own questions. So I'm happy to take questions. Anyone raise them? Or Alberto, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, well, thank you for the really interesting like a description of what's really happening in the market. When I heard the presentation, I was just wondering if this call for a big fix. I wonder if you have take a look, you're taking a look at the what's happening in Europe, because many of the issues that you raise and the ideas to remedy this situation is already being addressed by many European initiatives. For example, the Platform Work Act that passed a few months ago in Europe, addressing and incorporating, legalizing collective bargaining for workers. GDPR, legalizing the right to be forgotten, the right to portability, etc. The use of data trust to challenge data oligopolies, also emerging very strongly in Europe. But of course, we don't hear all these ideas in North America. And never mind Canada. I mean, the PIPEDA is way behind GDPR. The parliament is still discussing AID. We already have several pieces of legislation in Europe. There is no the right to consult workers on algorithms in Canada, but we had already that embraced and practiced and being fought about in Europe. So I'm just wondering, is this a big fixed agenda for North America, or is just an idea that perhaps might want to be big, I guess, compared to what is happening already in Europe, probably for the last 10 years?
Yeah, Alberto, the project, I should have introduced it more, is really anchored in Canada, right? About how we use competition tools and competition levers to regulate marketplaces. But absolutely, we've been taking inspiration from other jurisdictions, as Canada often does, right? We're not really policymakers here. We tend to be policy takers. We are much more comforted as a country when we can see examples from other jurisdictions. But thank you for bringing those forward. If it's okay, maybe we could go to two. There's two questions in the chat that kind of play off each other really nicely. Yeah, Denise, Chase, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, Alberto, I think it's a great question. And, I think in part, the European approach definitely has been, very kind of stringent and cross-cutting regulatory regimes, right? The Digital Markets Act, I think we're just beginning to see the kind of fruits of the Digital Markets Act, which tried to take the approach of, okay, instead of structural separations, we're going to regulate digital gatekeepers, that have certain size and scale elements. I mean, I saw something with the outgoing EU, DG Comp Chair Vestager, who said that she wishes she would have been more aggressive in her sort of competition litigation, and she wished she would have sought more structural remedies, because they famously did some of the biggest antitrust fines in history, but they didn't seek the structural remedies. And so I think I think it's a great question. Now in Europe, of course, there's also discussion that perhaps they've over-regulated and they're all worried about productivity and innovation. And so now there's a bit of a flip where there's a desire to actually foster national champions again, so that the pendulum perhaps is swinging back. But I think for Canada, and it makes the larger point too, that a lot of these issues have major geopolitical implications, and we can't just deal with them in a country by country basis, particularly when the most dominant firms are multinationals that, in many ways have much more sort of global power and wealth than many nation states. And so I think those are real questions that they don't have necessarily easy answers, but I think we can certainly take inspiration from some of the legislative activities in Europe for Canada.
Thank you.
So as Vass was saying, there's a couple of questions in chat that kind of relate to each other. One is by Gabby, who said he's just started kneading some dough. So he's unable to, I guess, ask the question visually.
Sure.
Yeah, do you want me to read it? I'll just read it out, and then yeah.
Sure.
So it says, "Wonderful talk. Can't wait to buy the book." So your pitch worked.
Haha.
What
Thank
do you
you.
Thanks.
what do you anticipate will happen under the Trump and probably inevitable Poilievre regimes.
Yeah, do you want me to, or Vass, you go for it.
I mean, Denise is probably reflecting this on the daily. I black it out sometimes because I'm not living in the US. Look, I think for Canada, the kind of core elements of what a contemporary conservative approach is to the role of the state in moderating markets is still a little bit unclear. We've seen Pierre talk about government protected oligopolies, right, which suggests maybe more of an appetite for unwinding or tinkering with existing publicly set regulation. I do think, again, that supply management is going to be up for grabs. And I put it forward only so that we can try to pause and push and stretch that and make sure we're having a constructive conversation if we're going to reevaluate it in the country. But what we're seeing, start to form under Trump is, I like this term from The Atlantic, the broligarchy, right? Like this fusion of tech power with state power in a way that feels new or a little bit different. And I think that's important to pay attention to, not because the word is a little bit fun to say, but because you see some echoes of that in Canada. Check out what the leaders at Shopify are tweeting, who they're aligning with, maybe the provincial Ford government overinvesting in Starlink recently. Is that techno authoritarianism coming to Canada in a particular way that will reshape, again, how we articulate that role of the state? But I fear I'm being a bit of a doom and gloomer, and none of that had to do with tariffs. So let me pass to Denise for thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just first on the broader antitrust agenda in the US, they just announced the Trump's appointment to the DOJ antitrust division, who is someone who's very supportive of the kind of Lena Khan approach of stronger antitrust enforcement, even though she's a conservative. And we have seen in some areas some bipartisan alignment on particularly stronger antitrust against the tech platforms, but also in pharmaceuticals and healthcare and also in agriculture. And many of that has been led at the state level with coalitions of state attorneys general, both Republican and Democrat, putting forward cases. So I think that work will continue because ultimately it's a populist agenda and it serves the constituencies well that many of these folks represent. But will we see the kind of strength of consumer protection activities and things like that? I would imagine that would wane a bit under a Trump administration. And then on the tariffs, it's something that I've been wanting to do more work on, and I've just been traveling too much. So I also feel like I don't have a great answer to that. I mean, it's clear that depending on how those tariffs are actually implemented, whether right now they're more hot air to sort of, signal this sort of, to throw the sort of like US procurement weight around a bit, and then, will they be across the board? Will they be sector specific? To me is not necessarily clear, but, I think it's an important sort of moment for Canada to be thinking about these questions of productivity and how we actually get more companies scaled up, more operational companies scaled up in Canada. Because, we have a huge issue with that. And either companies get bought up by incumbents before they really have a chance to become true competitors, or we just don't have an environment that is that conducive, because whether it's hard to access capital or otherwise. So I think it kind of is a nice moment perhaps for Canada to really, as we're having these big conversations about productivity, and tariffs, to think about our own supply chains, to sort of like relocalize some of that in Canada to the extent that it's possible, and think about, trying to foster our own industries, and not in like a national champions way, but, just in a way that hopefully makes us more productive, which we need going into the next couple of decades.
That's great. Anyone else want to ask a question, either in chat or I don't know. I keep saying visually. I'm not sure if that's the right way to say
A visual question. Yeah, you could hold something. You could hold something up.
it.
I will
Also,
say,
Gabby, I want some of that bread. So,
yeah,
feel free to send it.
Gabby with the hookups.
Okay, so we do have a
Yeah.
hand raised. So we have Anu Raphael.
Yeah, sorry, I can't currently just show my video, but I just wanted to say that kudos to the authors, and I found the work really interesting because one of the things that I don't want to say stresses me about Canada and some sectors is the monopoly. And I think one of the things I noticed just like doing a bit of research is what you find is that smaller businesses are being pushed out of the market because they can't compete. And you see that affecting economic viability. So you're wondering why there's inflation, there's not enough competition. So groceries are high, there's not enough competition. And even if smaller businesses want to come in, the production or the manufacturing ends have loyalty to the bigger supermarkets and the bigger chains. So why should I give you my product at a lower price when you don't have the same amount of reach? And so you see a web of issues, like a web of issues, and it's kind of perplexing. Where do you start from? Where do you pierce, for lack of use of word, where do you pierce the veil, and where do you pull down that mountain to deal with the issues? And I found the talk really interesting, just to say kudos, and I'd love to read more of your work.
Thank you so much.
I should put a link to the book as well. Sorry.
Requested at the York Library. It's not currently part of the York University Library offerings. There is an electronic option if anyone wants to it just takes a couple of clicks. It's all it takes. Yeah.
I wanted to just respond to that though, Anu. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for your kind words. And it sounds like you could have co-authored the book with us, because that's a lot of what we try to point to. And we do spend some time in the book talking about grocery and grocery supply chains as well. And one of the things that we bring up is that it's imperfect and it's been totally under enforced. But in the US, there is a law called the Robinson-Patman Act, which was meant to prevent price discrimination, as you described, where big retailers and big suppliers can't get into these kind of exclusive pricing deals where they do loyalty discounts and bulk discounts and things like that, making it more difficult for a little independent grocer to get Doritos for the same price or whatever. And so and so Canada doesn't have anything like that because it is difficult to enforce. It's a bit econometric to sort of figure out what the right price level is and all of that. But basically the same principle applies, that again, to have open and fair markets, an independent retailer, independent grocer should be able to buy the same goods at the same price as the biggest guys. But that's not the case. There's ultimately this sort of, for lack of a better word, like a poverty premium, where the smaller you are, the higher you have to pay to access sometimes the exact same product. So we'd like to see Canada explore perhaps something along those lines of a Robinson-Patman Act for Canada.
That's great. I have questions if unless somebody else wants to come in. Alberto, you.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I have questions, but
okay.
You didn't ask, and I don't want to monopolize this.
Okay. So I'm really interested in at the minute in sort of scams and fraud and gaming and all that sort of stuff, right? So this obviously comes up in your book. But you raised it also in your talk, where you're talking about who is it? Johann Rohr, the music is. I don't know if you could call them a music composer if they're using AI. So I don't know what they are.
I don't know.
But
he's a scammer. Let's call him a scammer.
Okay, but that to me that seems like there's a really interesting moment with capitalism, where markets are I don't know what you call it. The markets are kind of potentially facing disintegration, and instead of having markets as they are imagined and as they sometimes function, we end up instead with a set of kind of rigged arrangements that is enabled by a set of underlying digital algorithmic data technologies on top of the socio-technical arrangements that enable this, the business models that you also talked about, like the kind of asset ecosystem business model, these sorts of things, right? So this seems to be, to me, like there's a moment happening, and I'm not sure whether you think that that's the case, or whether you think it's a, there's a possible point of saving what we might want from markets and creating. It's a big question, sorry. Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, you're making me think of sort of, sure, enshittification, but kind of that slop era and kind of dead internet kind of all coming together, where it's like, Denise, earlier today we were in a conversation and Denise was mentioning sort of Sheen and Temu, and, we have an element of, the size of the counterfeit economy and just the whole kind of feeling when you're shopping online, that meme of expectation versus reality. And so often, sometimes we're laughing about what we bought and how it looks so different from the picture, but really, why is that happening so often, right? Why is there this erosion of trust from, what we're seeing and also what we're being told, and kind of falsified reviews and kind of images? How do we, is this a low point, or is this an inevitable point? Maybe that's some of what you're asking. But I think something we came to quite often in conversation in our drafting and sort of what we wanted to pull forward is, where do we have instances that we have tools that are maybe underutilized as part of this fight? And back to our, unbridled irrational optimism, the false and misleading advertising standards under the Competition Act can be a really powerful tool here some of the time. Instead, we are often placing this burden on individuals to sort of push back or, do their homework, or even the Competition Bureau puts out advice, which is like, make sure you do this kind of like homework that might prevent you from buying something that you don't really want. Well, what other mechanisms and accountabilities should we see in these e-commerce ecosystems? I'm rambling a little bit. I hope I wouldn't fail that question on an exam on your test, on your class, Keen. Denise, do you have anything to chase with, or that was sparking up for you in that question?
Because I think with Denise as well, you obviously wrote the book The Myth of Capitalism, so you've been potentially seeing this for some time, right? So are we at a particular, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the word nadir or nadir or whatever the word is, particularly bad inflection point, or is this just continuation of normal?
Like in terms of, sorry, just in terms of kind of enshittification, scams, counterfeits, or slop generally.
Well, just the idea that like if you're saying capitalism is, the capitalism it isn't working, and that's what the Myth of Capitalism came out, what, 2018? So
yeah,
this is six years ago. You presumably you're writing it a year or two before that, so it's something you've been seeing for a long time. And I don't know if it's got worse since you wrote that book, or is it just even keel, or is it, I don't know, maybe there's some room for improvement because there's more awareness and there's more kind of policy interventions, and is it a positive or negative, I guess, story there, I guess?
Oh yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah, right.
I mean, when I think at the sort of like largest, most structural level, and you've got like guys like Ray Dalio writing his like missives about long range human cycles and things, but I prefer, there's an old historian and his wife Will and Ariel Durant who wrote a book, Lessons of History, and they look at thousands of years of human history to look for broad trends, and one or two of them are essentially that wealth concentrates slowly and then dissipates quickly, and it's usually as a result of war or or revolution, some sort of like very disruptive force. And even David Graeber in his book Debt: The First 5,000 Years talks about this, that ultimately what is one of the sort of like drivers of declines in civilizations is that the debt burden becomes so large, and if there's no mechanism to actually to relieve debt, then that's where you sort of get these large scale and again often violent sort of redistributive things like land redistribution. But certain ancient societies used to have things where they would do debt jubilees, where they would actually on a regular cadence forgive debts and sort of reset the ledgers. And so are we at that point in the cycle? Like it sort of feels that way, doesn't it? A bit, and I don't know exactly how it ends, but that's one of them. And one of the other trends that he talks about is how nations move typically between cooperation and collaboration. So and we've kind of been in that 50 years since the end of World War II of like general kind of global cooperation, multilateralism, globalism, whatever you want to call it. And it's clear that cycle is turning, and nations are moving inward. We're having more protectionist, type policies. There's obviously talk of nuclear war to get really dark. And the doomsday clock tells us that we're, the closest that we've ever been. So yeah, I mean, has it gotten better? Maybe not. But at the same time, I do think, to your point, there is a lot more public awareness, and we've elected some really great sort of like public advocates into office and into administrative positions that really want to do right by their mandate. And those are where I find inspiration, is sort of there's a lot of people working really, really hard to try to turn some of this around. It takes a long time.
Thank you. So Alberto, you had a question? Is any?
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry,
I'm sorry,
Alberto,
I don't mean to ask too many questions. It's just so stimulating the conversation. I noticed that it seems to me that this diagnosis of the more sophisticated market failure in the digital economy, it should be addressed by more regulation. That seems to me partially the message here. When I discuss these ideas with my students, for example, in one class we discuss the problems with algorithmic pricing or algorithmic dynamic, right? So we come to the conclusion that yes, we need regulation, but there are so many problems with regulation, starting with politics. It becomes so unfeasible to introduce more regulation. Then it comes the problem of regulatory costs. More intervention, more costs, that really make the problem even more problematic. And then the third objection that I usually hear is, okay, kind of a small economy, we don't have the luxury of over-regulating to stimulate or create capital flight. So we don't have many options here. And so I'm just wondering if there is room for perhaps a complementary alternative here other than regulation. I'm thinking of, for example, of ideas around enforcement technologies. For example, the European Institute is exploring the use of AI to enforce, using AI to control companies' abusive behavior when they disclose terms and conditions or disclose or collect data. So the technology is being used to detect, alert, and then enforce in light of the failure of the regulatory agency. Mm-hmm. As an experiment that's happening now in Italy. And then we have, the issue of emerging alternative. We have, now Harvard is challenging Uber in Canada. It's a new app. It's proposing to treat workers better, avoid algorithmic pricing, pay fair, etc. We have data cooperatives. I mean, so there are other options there. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about these other non-regulatory or non-traditional regulatory options that are emerging. Do you think that those ideas are feasible, or maybe we just need to push harder the regulatory agenda.
Well, there aren't instances where we're suggesting that a technological system should replace a regulatory system. Certainly, sometimes we see policy delivered through product. I've looked at the literature sort of using algorithms to detect fake reviews and elements like that. But Alberto, you're absolutely right in terms of other market structures, right? Cooperatives, should delivery mechanisms for restaurants or even the digitization of taxis be delivered through digital public infrastructure, right? Should we own that system? Should it be public? Should it have a wage floor that we've set? If we're going to agree, especially post-pandemic, that it's something that's part of the fabric of our societies. These are important conversations. These are how markets get to be remade and how we can sort of correct for the failures that we're seeing. And to our mind, they're actually part of the big fix, right? A more comprehensive, holistic, constant eye to the opportunity to use the tools that we have, not to abuse them, not to create, overly burdensome regulatory environments that kind of don't help anyone, but how to make markets work more effectively. That's the question that we're obsessed with answering in ways big and small. So thank you for bringing those, other interventions and forms forward, and thanks for talking about it at length with your students. It sounds like a pretty awesome class.
Thank you very much, everyone. So I'm going to say a big thank you to Vass, Bednar, and Denise Hearn for coming today and doing the keynote. We will definitely make sure that the library has got copies in the future, because I'm sure that a lot of people will be interested, and a lot of people, I'm sure, will be, assigning it. Oh, look, bread, pictures of bread, assigning it in courses. So
wow, that's not just any bread. That is gorgeous bread. Wow, amazing.
Yeah. So a big thank you to both of you for coming and doing the keynote, and a big thank you to everyone else who's attended today and also given talks today. It was fantastic to get 2 days of discussion with everyone about all sorts of different issues that we're working on, and finding common ground that we can work on future research together. So thank you, everyone. And
thank you.
And goodbye, and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks.
And the
Happy
snow.
Friday.
Yeah. Happy Friday.
Everyone, happy holidays.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah. Bye now.